My name is Chris and I'm by name the Director of the Center of Excellence in Creative Arts at RVP. But for the Writers' Conference, I am co-chair along with Patricia Wynn, and I want to welcome all of you to the 7th Annual Banquet. For those attending the conference, we open up the banquet to our community. And so you're maybe sitting at a table with some of our community members, and these are people that support us, that come year after year, and who are very interested in furthering literary arts here in Clarksville. So we welcome you also. We have a number of people to thank who really are, they're sponsors who really help us pull this off, because there's an awful lot to do. We also need support, because we're not, this conference is put on by the Clarksville Montgomery County Arts and Heritage Development Council. And we really want, when we put on this conference, we have limited funds, because we do an awful lot, because really what our goal is to support and sponsor arts and cultural events around Clarksville throughout the year. But also we help preserve historical sites and to put on historical commemorations throughout the county. So this is just one of the events that this organization does. And we have many sponsors who I would like to thank at this time. There's President Tim Hall. We appreciate your support in this. Patricia and Howard Wynn, who have been generous donors over the years toward this conference. Dean Sambos. Doctors Jeannie Beth and David Johnston. The Customs House, Museum and Cultural Center. The Fort Campbell Officers Spouses Club. The Gannett Foundation. Our local paper, the Leaf Chronicle. The City of Clarksville. And that, last but not least, the Tennessee Arts Commission, who have given us a grant toward keeping this conference going. There are a couple of other people that have been told we need to thank. You'll notice at your table there's a beautiful flower arrangement, and those were done by Inga Filippo. Thank you. Dixie Webb. And Judith, where are you? So it's tradition here at the banquet that we allow someone at the table to take home cake with them. And this year the criteria for the person at your table for being the one to take home the cake is that person who has last attended a live performance. So we'll leave you to work that out amongst yourselves. I am not alone. I would like to say that we're delighted tonight to have with us as our distinguished keynote speaker, Ferris. And I would like to ask Dr. Howard Wynn to come up and introduce Ferris.
I've really had a wonderful day getting to be with Ferris. University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He is a former chairman of the National Endowment for the Humanities, President Clinton, and the founding director of the Center for the Study of Southern Culture at the University of Mississippi, where he was a faculty member for 18 years. He has an MA in English from Northwestern University, an MA in Folklore from the University of Pennsylvania, and a PhD in Folklore from the University of Pennsylvania. He has written or edited 10 books and created 15. Do I need this? That's why I'm mumbling? Yeah. Okay. And edited 15 or more documentary films concerning African American music and folklore in the Mississippi Delta. One of his books, the one I attempted to lift over here, Encyclopedia of Southern Culture, was a nominee for the Pulitzer Prize, and he should have gotten it. It is a marvelous, marvelous compendium of Southern culture. I know there are some that say there is no Southern culture, but he has definitely proved there is. And the term culture is a rather expansive term, and I am delighted particularly for him being here tonight, because the Encyclopedia of Southern Culture points out something that I think is extremely important. We have here in Clarksville a Clarksville Montgomery County Museum and Cultural Center. And culture covers so many fascinating and wonderful areas. Religion, art, architecture, folklore, literature, music, science, etc., etc. And it is expressed through all kinds of mediums: film, public radio, music, and all kinds of things. But the South is particularly, as he has chronicled here, is particularly vibrant in its culture. One other thing I'll add before I let him say anything. I was particularly struck by the fact that he was selected one of the top 10 professors in the United States. By Rolling Stone magazine. And that was before Keith Richards was put on the selection committee. So, Dr. Ferris is a wonderful gentleman, and we discovered today that he has some surprising local connections. Bill Ferris.
Thank you, Howard. It's such an honor to be here, and I would not be here without the wonderful efforts of Pat and Howard. They patiently put up with my emails and worked out all the details for me to safely arrive, and Howard made the trip to the airport and met me, and we've had a great day all day. Chris, I'm grateful to you for all you've done to make this evening possible, and I was thrilled to meet President Tim Hall and to learn of our shared connections at the University of Mississippi. Austin P is a university that's been high on my vision for a long time, because I love Southern music. And your music programs here have a great legacy. The faculty and students I've known so many students who were looking into the field of music, and I would say, where are you going? I'm going to study at Austin Peay. It's also a great pleasure to be here with two old and dear friends, Beth Ann Finley and Tom Franklin. Beth Ann's poetry is nothing short of stunning as she describes what we all know, kudzu, as a sort of emblem of the South. And I'm reading an inscribed copy of Tom's latest book, Crooked Letter, Crooked Letter. I'm sure it'll be a film before long. Rita Grimsley Johnson, one of my great heroes. I've read her with great love for decades. She is one of the most amazing journalists today. William Gay is carrying on that noble tradition of Southern Gothic literature, close to my heart, and he is on the cutting edge of that. I was also thrilled, it takes me a while to connect all the points, but two of my great uncles, William and Robert Craig, were students here in Clarksville at Southwestern College. And my mother often, who's 93, I was at her birthday last week, and I'm going to call her tomorrow and proudly tell her that I'm in Clarksville, where her uncle studied. And they had a deep and long affection in their heart. And when Mother says, explaining to me where all this family came from, she says they both went to Southwestern before it was in Memphis, when it was in Clarksville. And I always nod my head. But I didn't make that connection until I was in the car and we were talking coming here. But the whole theme of literature is close to my heart. I'm a folklorist, but I began as an aspiring writer in college. And I realized I could never really make a living at that. So I fell back on folklore and teaching and interviewing writers and artists and musicians who deal with the South. And I'm working on a book right now and hope to finish it during the coming year, which will be an edited volume of these writers. And I'm thinking of calling it Going to the Territory, that phrase from Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn. Because the South is and has always been the territory for the United States, for American culture, culturally, geographically, racially. The South is on the edge. It's where you go to get to that edgy place. And Southern writers and their voices are the epicenter of what we can think of as the American narrative. I'm doing an article right now for a journal at Harvard, which is on the American narrative, Daedalus. And they've asked me to look at Southern writers as a focus of my article. And nothing could be closer to my heart, because I teach this every year in a course on Southern literature and the oral tradition. But Southern writers, I argue, are the epicenter of the American narrative voice. From Mark Twain to Ralph Ellison, to Richard Wright, to William Faulkner, to Eudora Welty, to Tennessee Williams, to all the writers featured at your great conference. The legacy continues. The well continues to flow with a rich and vital experience. And we were talking about culture. Howard was mentioning that. It reminded me of my old friend Robert Penn Warren, and I was thrilled to learn that he studied his last year of high school here in Clarksville. And we drove by that school today. I felt like getting down and bowing to him. Mr. Warren and I were at Yale together, and we had a friendship that continued after I went to Mississippi until his death. Every year I would make the pilgrimage to his home in Fairfield, Connecticut, and to their summer home in West Wattsboro, Vermont. And he is an interview that will be in this book, along with interviews with Eudora Welty, Ernest Gaines, Alice Walker, and many others. And he talked often about Alan Tate and Caroline Gordon, whose home is also here, Ben's Folly. And he said to me once that a fish never thinks about water until he's out of it. And we Southerners never think about Southern culture until we're out of it, until we cross what is called the iced tea and grits line. And when you cross that line, your tea will be served hot and your grits will be served with sugar and cream. Sacrilege. God forgive them, for they know not what they do. But that's it. When we step across that line, we become aware that we are different. The way we speak, the way we eat, the way we enjoy life is different. And when we started the Center for the Study of Southern Culture, people said in published articles, we thought Southern culture was an oxymoron. There is no culture. That was the H.L. Mencken line. But I argue this is the heart of American culture. This is where it all starts, and it is continuing in a vital way. The South is the most documented place on earth. Photographers, filmmakers, writers, artists have constantly, from the first settlers to the present, mined this region for its beauty and for its tragic history. This is the cultural hearth of America. This is the taproot of American culture. And how do we understand the South? How do we define and somehow get our hands around this world that we live in? We are the fish swimming in it. And it's hard to see it because it's around us every day. Eudora Welty suggests that one way to understand the South is with the understanding of the sense of place. Southerners are powerfully shaped by the places in which they grow up and live. And we all know that when a Southerner meets a stranger, the first question is, where are you from? Oh, you're from Clarksville. You're from Nashville. You're from Memphis, New Orleans. Well, once you know where they're from, you can forgive a lot. I know people from New Orleans who are strange, just like you. Come on in. There is a powerful sense of place that is a combining of love and hate. Faulkner, in his character Quentin Compson, he's in his room at Harvard. Quentin has arrived as a freshman, and his roommate, Shreve, is from Canada. And Shreve is curious about the South, and he looks at Quentin and he says, tell about the South. What's it like there? What do they do there? Why do they live there? Why do they live at all? Those are the questions we raise in this encyclopedia, knowing that we never will get the answers fully answered. But it's like peeling the onion. We constantly ask the questions, and we get closer and closer. Through the glass darkly, we begin to understand this world we call the South. Now, for me as a folklorist, it all began on a farm outside of Vicksburg, Mississippi, as a child. And my grandfather was a storyteller. He was also the first agronomist in Mississippi. And he would tell these long, wonderful stories of Alabama and the 40 Thieves. And at the end, we would say, Granddad, tell it again. And he would start over and tell it again. And there was also a black church on this farm. My family were the only whites. All of the other families were blacks. And when I was about 3 or 4, a lady named Mary Gordon would take me on the first Sunday of every month when that church had services to the services, and I learned the hymns. And as I grew older, I realized there were no hymnals in that church. And when those families disappeared, the music would disappear. So in high school, I began to make tape recordings and photographs and began to record without really knowing why. But I simply wanted to preserve that beautiful sound. And that led me eventually to folklore. When I went to the University of Pennsylvania, I arrived with a box full of tapes. And my professor, Kenneth Goldstein, was at his desk, and I said, "Dr. Goldstein, is this the kind of thing I can do here?" And he looked at it. He said, "That will be your dissertation." He said, "You go back and do more of that." So I went back and began to work and interview blues singers, gospel singers, the whole range of people who were part of what Faulkner called his little postage stamp of native soil. That was what I was seeking to understand. And I realized that as we go further in what we call higher education, we distance ourselves from the roots of who we are. And we know that there's somebody back home pumping gas at a filling station who's a hell of a lot smarter than we are. Why? My brother, who was a farmer, loved to say, when you see a turtle sitting on top of a fence post, you realize he had some help getting there. And all of us are turtles. We're on top of a fence post because of education, and we all know that there's an aunt or an uncle or a parent, someone who took us by the ear and said, "Get back in there and finish your homework and do the right thing." So this book, which I really was asked to come here to talk about, Give My Poor Heart Ease, is a return to those worlds. It opens on the farm with Mary Gordon. And it's a new breed of book. As a folklorist, I'm lucky to have lived into a new era of technology that allows me to have a book with photographs of people like B.B. King, but inside the back cover is a CD and a DVD of the sound recordings and films I did. So I have been amazed at what this book does. It's kind of like a new breed of book. It's been made into an electronic book, a multimedia book on Kindle. It was one of the first done by Amazon. So if you download it onto an iPad, as you read it, you can double-click and listen to musical samples. You can view film samples that key to the very voice and text that you're reading. And now it's being made into a hybrid musical, theatrical event with the voices of the people and actual live performances, as well as the performed recordings and the films and photographs. And T-Bone Burnett and Morgan Freeman are co-executive producing it. So all of this is, to me, a kind of validation of that sense of place. And I can't literally carry you down to have breakfast with my mother as I had last week. But I can take you on a trip with me. So if we can dim these lights, I want to talk to you about this process, which began in the 60s when I was a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania. But even before that, I was on a journey, and I didn't really have a sense of where it would lead, traveling up and down Highway 61 and smaller roads. But it began on the farm with people like Virginia Peel Davis, who ran a grocery store. And on weekends, I would stop and sit on her porch and drink a Coke, eat a moon pie from Chattanooga, and hear the stories of people. It's an old place, deeply rooted in history, with memories that go back to the Civil War, and families like Robert and Martha Appleton, who helped raise me. I tell my students an African proverb that when an old man or woman dies, a library burns to the ground. And these were my first libraries. Samantha and Maggie Gordon were 2 of 5 sisters who lived together in a house. And Samantha married, the only sister to marry. And the first night of their marriage, she brought her husband home, and with the 5 sisters together. The next morning, he left and never came back. I began to see this place as a cycle of life with each of the seasons. The spring, the winter, in the fall there was the killing of pigs, and the community would come together to slaughter the pigs and to butcher them and to share them with each family. And those were the living libraries from which I drew my knowledge. The center of this community was Rose Hill Church, a church that has stood in that place for over 200 years. It was first built as a brush arbor church, with the limbs of trees cut to form a shelter in which the worshipers prayed and listened to the hymns and sermons. And today the congregation is a congregation descended from ancestors who are buried around the church in the hillside. And every first Sunday, those communion events and the sermons celebrate the birth, the weddings, and the final rites of death of members of the congregation. And so I began to look more closely at those worlds and the sense of finality they represented as an urgency calling me to get out and record and capture these worlds while those libraries were still accessible. So I began to travel further from the farm to places like Morning Star, Mississippi, where I recorded my first blues with Lovey Williams, an amazing musician, and his family. Can we get it? That's good. Amazing people, like this evangelical salesman of fruit and vegetables and his customer. And I would pull over and out with my camera and tape recorder capture their stories. Along Highway 61, I began to find the roots of the blues in families like the Dodson family who lived outside of Lorman, Mississippi. And there I discovered Lewis Dodson's family and the one strand on the wall, which he made from a broom wire that he stretched along the wall of his house to create an amazing sound. One strand is really the heart of bottleneck blues style. And And I continued up the road, and there were beautiful hand-painted signs that beckoned me into churches like this church in Belle Fountain, Mississippi, where I discovered a congregation that still sings the old sacred harp hymns. The first hymns created in our country were composed in Boston in the colonial period, and today, as many of you know, they're still sung in the South in white and black congregations. I took this picture of the minister, Reverend Enoch, in his 90s, with a young girl about 6 or 7 singing in front of him. Moved forward about 20 years, and I was teaching at the University of Mississippi, and she was my student, a graduate student doing an MA in Southern Studies. And focusing on sacred harp, as she looked at my archives, to her delight and mine, she found this photograph of her as a child. And today she's teaching music at Russ College and carrying on that tradition. So the circle is unbroken. And these hymns, the all-day sings, are broken at noon for the wonderful dinner on the grounds, where delicious food and cakes and drinks are served. I continued all up through the Delta, and the old legacy of sharecropping was clearly still alive and well in these sharecropper homes with numbers painted on the side. Anonymous looking houses, but inside they were very personal and powerful reminders of the ancestors and photographs and family on the wall. I visited the most dreaded place in Mississippi, Parchman Penitentiary, 28,000 acres of penal farm, where Alan Lomax and John Lomax recorded their work chants, and I was able to record those work chants. The electric chair where inmates were put to death. I traveled on into the Mississippi Hills, north of Oxford, in Gravel Springs, and met with Mr. and Mrs. Ofer Turner. Mr. Turner is the blues patriarch who played fife and drum music all his life. And he and Mrs. Turner took me in and explained to me the history of drumming. Drums were outlawed during the antebellum period after the revolution in Haiti, when Toussaint Louverture threw out the French and used drums to communicate with his soldiers. But in a few places like Gravel Springs, drumming endured. Here, black families owned their own land. And in this picture of Ofer Turner with his granddaughter, we see a powerful example of how this legacy continues. Today, sadly, he is no longer living. He died in his 90s, but she continues to play fife and drum music and carries it on. He showed me how he would make the fife from a cane fife on his farm, made from bamboo. And on the 4th of July, he would take that cane to the 4th of July picnic. And first there was a baseball game. And afterwards the teams gathered to congratulate each other. And then the fife and drum music began, and all ages gathered there. Wee hours of midnight, And traveling up Highway 61, I was reminded of the presence of racial violence and the Ku Klux Klan in the 60s that were always a shadow lurking. And I began to work in the black community away from exposure to the white world in towns like Clarksville, where the steps of an old hotel still had a sign, "Rooms for Color." I worked in the black radio station, WROX, where blues and gospel music were played, and the black DJ Early Right at night would say, "Nighttime is the right time, the early right time." And he launched many, many careers of local musicians. If there is a crossroads in the Delta, I would argue that it's in Clarksville. This is the home of Sam Cooke, of John Lee Hooker, of Muddy Waters. It is the home of Reverend C.L. Franklin, the father of Aretha Franklin. Music is everywhere. But I anchored in the home of Jasper Love on Dempster Street. And inside that home there were photographs of Jasper and his brother Willie as young musicians in the year 1942, taken in the Daisy Studio run by Benjamin Hooks's family. Ben Hooks was president of the NAACP and sadly died last year. And in that home, blues house parties were a special moment every week when musicians like Pinetop Johnson and Marty Shirley would gather, and the whole community would come in, all ages. And I began to see the community as a blues family. The kinship of music was what kept everyone together, celebrating life and remembering their shared history. And Jasper Love in my book talks about his long memory of how his grandparents were brought to Clarksville as slaves on a boat up the Sunflower River and worked in the cotton fields from can to can't, from Can-See to Can't-See. I moved from Clarksville to Leland, Mississippi, and worked with James Thomas, a gifted blues artist. And here, James Thomas on the right and his uncle Joe Cooper took me around Leland and introduced me to the cafes and the places where they performed, and explained to me that blues is a deep study. You have to give it long and careful thought if you play it and if you understand it. And I discovered that Mr. Thomas was not only a gifted musician, but a gifted sculptor who made faces and animals and birds and skulls from Delta clay. This is a hepcat with the sunglasses. This is a quail held by his wife. As a child, he was told that blacks could not hunt quail. They were only for whites to hunt. So he said, "I'll make my own out of clay." This is a woman with a wig on, and his children were constantly with him. 13 children today, all of whom have a copy of the book on their father. Several are in Chicago and others still in Leland. When James Thomas first came to Leland, he met the patriarch of blues there, Shelby Papa Jazz Brown, who took him into his home. And every weekend, James Thomas would play in his back room on Kent's Alley, a blues house party where the whole neighborhood would gather, drink corn liquor, eat chitlins and sandwiches. 1972, I moved to New Haven, Connecticut, and began to teach at Yale University. I lived as a resident fellow in Calhoun College, one of the 12 residential colleges there. And every year, my friend James Thomas came up for several days to perform, to tell stories, and share his sculpture. He became an icon, much loved by the students who always spoke to him when they saw him on campus. And because of his love for sculpture, we visited the Yale Art Gallery's sculpture garden, and he was inspired by some of those images. We also, when he was not doing anything, sat in the guest suite at Calhoun College, and he talked to me about his memory of growing up in Mississippi. In the classroom, all ages came to hear him, not only college students at Yale, but K through 12, and they were deeply moved by what he had to share. Those students have gone on to do amazing things. One of them, Jeff Bukes, is the CEO of Time Warner. Another, Tim Duffy, has founded with his wife Denise, he was in high school at the time, Music Maker Foundation, which provides health care and instruments and even houses to blues singers and traditional artists around the South. James Thomas would perform concerts at Yale every year and also demonstrate his sculpture, showing the students how he could take a block of clay and create a face, a skull, a bird out of it. We also brought the king of the blues, Mr. B.B. King, to Yale, and he both spoke and performed. My appointment was in Afro-American Studies and American Studies, and here in the Afro-American Studies office, he's speaking with faculty and students. On the left, with his chin in his hand, was my chairman, Charles Davis, the first black tenured professor at Yale. With his back to the camera was my dear friend who hired me, John Blassingame, who was the editor of the Frederick Douglass papers. And the students were deeply moved by B.B. One of my students on the right, Jody Braxton, was a graduate student in American Studies. Today, she's a distinguished poet and a professor at the College of William and Mary. But B.B. literally swept that campus up in his performances in Sprague Hall in the music school at Yale. There was standing room only. An honorary doctorate of humane letters at Yale. And when the students heard he was going to receive that, they said, "We want you to be our baccalaureate speaker the day before." And B's answer was, "Well, Bill, I'm not a speaker." And they said, "Just bring Lucille," which he did. And it was an unbelievable event, and the students have never forgotten it. This is B.B. with the president of Yale at that time, Kingman Brewster. B has always had a dream of having grown up with very little education in the Mississippi Delta, of seeing the blues taught seriously and studied within the academy. And that led to the creation of the Blues Archive at the University of Mississippi, where all of his personal record collection is housed today. We followed B.B. into his penthouse apartment on Central Park West in New York City and talked with him about his memories.
And then later on I started seeing would sing in church, and the preacher, sanctified preacher, played guitar in church, sanctified church. It was electric guitar. Very exciting to me.
He said that he never had a family growing up. And so today, when he performs, the audience is his family. He looks at them as kin, and his musical performances are deeply connected to that family. I followed B.B. on the road and to see what it was like. He says, nighttime is the right time, it's the life I know. And this is a concert at Lucifer's Club in Boston. And I shot him during his first performance, and then during the break followed him back to the room where he would take a little rest and sign albums and try to get a few winks of sleep before the next concert. And I thought this would be a good cover for the book. I took the title from the verse Highway 61 Blues includes, I walked Highway 61 till I give down in my knees, trying to find somebody to give my poor heart ease. So music has always been a source of comfort and a way to survive. And so I thought I should let B.B. have a few winks and rest, which he did, before he went back on the stage in a new suit and a new set of songs for his audience. So from the very beginning of blues roots in those Mississippi worlds to the greatest musician of the history of blues, B.B. King, we can see how these places shape each other in such a deep way, and how music, literature, and art capture those and share them with the world in a powerful, enduring way. And the artists, the writers who are here tonight and at this conference are a critical, central part of that tradition. Thank you. I'll be happy to take questions if we have time.
Do you play?
What?
Do you play?
I can, but I don't want to spoil your evening. I used to play. My wife tells me I'm too old to do it, but I do it for my students. I have a guitar and I bring it in my Southern music class. I play blues, rock and roll, and country. And they're very forgiving. They are all better musicians than I am.
Well, you're going to give them a grade.
That's right.
You want to expand a little bit on your activities with Robert Penn Warren?
Yeah.
I think the local population would be interested in that.
Well, Mr. Warren, there was really a whole circle of friends. As a child, Eudora Welty was friends, her parents were friends with my grandparents. And she and a circle of friends who included Charlotte Capers, who was from Columbia, Tennessee. Charlotte's father was Bishop of Mississippi, the Episcopal Bishop. And they would come over and do paintings and watercolors on our farm, and I grew up knowing that Eudora was someone important. And later, when I was at Davidson, I invited her boldly to be our Speaker of the Year. And to the amazement of the English faculty, she came. And they said, why would you come? And she said, well, I just knew Bill's family and I thought I should. So my stock went way up. And that was the beginning of a lifelong friendship with Eudora. At the end of her life, I would always go visit her with a bottle of Maker's Mark. And I remember once I visited with Cleon Brooks, and we went out to dinner with that Maker's Mark on the table at a little restaurant in Jackson. And the waitresses all over there, they'd come up and say, what do you have, honey? You know, it was just, you're one of us. And so she and Cleon had a couple of glasses of Maker's Mark on the ice, and the conversation flowed. But it was through Eudora. When I went to Yale, she told Mr. Warren that I was coming. And the Warrens and Cleon Brooks sort of took me in as one of them. And I just adored them. And Mr. Warren was unbelievably wonderful. And his wife, as you probably know, Eleanor Clark, was just as much a Connecticut Yankee as he was a Southerner. And he would tell these marvelous stories over dinner, and she would say, oh, Red, shut up. And it would go on like that. And so I would see, I felt like I needed to see him at least every few months to keep my juices flowing, because he was like a bad boy. He would tell all these stories, and you know, he was just an unvarnished voice of the South. And he never left the South. His memory of growing up in Guthrie and his experiences at Vanderbilt and here in Clarksville were very much alive and well. And I remember after his death, I went back to see Eleanor Clark. And they lived in Fairfield in this old barn that he had renovated. And he said that when they first moved in, they were in the kitchen having breakfast, and said the cows came up to the room and looked in, you know, wanting to get back in their barn. But she and I talked about him, and then it was cold, there was snow on the ground, but we went out and walked through this long walk around this field, talking about him and his deep love for the South. And I brought a group of Russian scholars. One of the things we did at the University of Mississippi was create a partnership through our center with the Gorky Institute of World Literature. And to my amazement, the Russians love Southern writers as much as their own writers, because they're deeply connected. And I led 4 delegations to Russia to look at Faulkner, Richard Wright, Faulkner and Sholokov, and the American and the Russian South. And then we hosted those delegations here. One of the groups that came here, I took to Norris, Tennessee to visit Alex Haley and John Rice Irwin there. And it was a very moving experience. But one of the events we organized was a Robert Penn Warren Symposium in the Beinecke Rare Book Library at Yale. And we had 5 distinguished American scholars and 5 Russian scholars. They included Cleon Brooks and C. Van Woodward and others, Lewis Simpson. And afterwards, Mr. Warren was not there. He said, bring them up to our home in West Wadsboro, which was their summer home. So we went up there. And while we were there, I had my little Super 8 camera, because I'm always obsessively trying to record. So I got Robert Penn Warren, Cleon Brooks, and C. Van Woodward alone in a room, and asked them just to start talking about their memories of the South. And that's going to be part of this next book as well. But it was like it was just yesterday. Mr. Warren would get so excited he could hardly speak. And every day he would get in his swimming trunks. They had a wonderful little spring-fed pool. And it was like something out of the 20s. He had this this swimming outfit that was full body, and he would go in there and swim for an hour and come back to his study and write for a few hours. And then he would have all these admirers like me who would come there and sit at his feet. And Mrs. Warren was an amazing cook. She would cook these great meals, and we would sit around drinking and eating and talking into the night. But he was a very powerful center for that whole fugitive group. And Cleonth Brooks was equally a younger but very important part of that as well. And they, as you know, were at LSU publishing the Southern Quarterly, and they were the first to publish Eudora Welty. So she was forever indebted to them. And I remember once when Cleonth was there, I took him down to see Eudora. And whenever you would visit Eudora, she would come to the front door and stand behind the screen. You would see her silhouette. She would never come out. But when we arrived with Mr. Brooks, she came out. And they embraced, and then they locked arms and walked to the house singing a hymn. And I thought, this is too good. But one last story about Eudora. I would see her every time I went home, and I would call her and see when it would be convenient to come over. As her hearing began to fail, I called her once, and I said, Eudora, I wondered if I could come over and see you on Saturday. She said, that would be lovely. What time would you like to come? And I said, would 10 o'clock be all right? And she said, did you say 7 o'clock? I said, no, 10 o'clock. She said, oh, good. For a moment there, I thought you were testing our friendship. But Mr. Warren, I mean, this is sacred ground here. It's like Faulkner lovers who come to Oxford. But Guthrie and Clarksville and Vanderbilt and Bowling Green, where he is also revered. But his heart never left this sense of place here. And his love for the South and wrestling with the legacy of the Civil War. And he wrote an essay in the New Yorker that was later republished called When Jefferson Davis Got His Citizenship Back. And he was talking about, as a child when he grew up, there was a local sort of reprobate in Guthrie who would get drunk on weekends, and they would see him lying in the ditch the next morning, unable to get up, and his name was Jeff Davis. So all his childhood, he heard these reverential stories about Jeff Davis, and he thought that's who they were talking about. But only later did he realize they were two different people. Any other questions? Well, I want you to know what a thrill it is to be here, and I salute what you're doing, and if there's any way that we can be of support through the worlds I'm connected to at the University of North Carolina and the Center for Study of the American South, we will be at your side. And I'm very proud to be here, and thank you for a lovely evening.
Very seriously ill in Vanderbilt Hospital.
No, he's not in Vanderbilt. He's
Okay.
at Rehab.
Well, wherever. But one of the great Southerners, in my mind, a hero, is very ill. I
thank you all for coming out tonight. Wayne, that was an amazing speech. Thank you so much for coming and visiting with us. I will gladly sit at your feet. Take note of that. Anyhow, we'll see the writers and first thing in the morning, bright and early. And for the rest of you, please drive safely. All right. Good night.